everyone, and welcome to another Scots Wi Hae podcast. And I'm joined today by poet, translator, linguist, educator and musician, Anne Pia. Hello, Anne.
Hello, Alistair.
Now, that's quite a CV. Can you tell us a bit about your fascinating story and just how you've come to this point and all the things that we've covered there?
Well, I think the important thing, the first thing to say is that music has always been a soundtrack to my life. It's always been a very, very central part to my life, right from when I suppose I grew up in a musical home. My mother loved jazz, all of that. So grew up with that. Started learning the piano at 12, and then we've moved from there to, a love of Scots traditional music, opera, classical music, and so on. That definitely. Food as well, which we'll probably come to later. Languages, I grew up with an Italian grandmother. She brought me up. Italian dialect was probably my first language. That's very distinct from Italian, which I learned later. Right. And again, we'll probably come to that. But I think that opened me up. That experience opened me up to learning other languages and appreciating other languages. And I got very into French probably in my last years at school. And in a sense, would love to have lived in France, actually, but that never happened. But I always like to identify as French when I'm in France, try to be French. So there's that. Education, I suppose I'm passionate about education, and I write to educate in a sense, in that I write for young people. When I'm writing, that's my target audience. I'm writing for people in their 20s to 40 somethings. That's in my head. Wanted to communicate with them, to reach out to them and have some dialogue with them. And that really started, I suppose I was doing my homework one night about the age of 9, and I thought I want to teach. That's what I want to. I want to do something, that's worthwhile and valuable. And then really, very easily just went into that and have had a wonderful career in education. I started in secondary, teaching secondary languages, and then became a senior manager, went into adult learning, Her Majesty's Inspectorate, and was on the Adult Literacy Task Force for Ministerial Task Force for Adult Literacy. And so, in a sense, I've retained, since retiring even, I've retained that tremendous passion and interest in education. Does that cover everything? I think that was all the things, yes.
I think that's a beginning. That's a good beginning before we chat. Let's begin with your poetry. Well, actually, I wonder, I should have asked you this beforehand, but would it be possible to have a reading? Would that be?
Yeah, I could do a reading.
I think that would be nice for people to hear.
A poem, right. I published this in April 2021. And this is, I suppose, kind of evidence of my love of languages, because I decided I wanted to respond to the poems of Charles Baudelaire, Les Fleurs du Mal, a pretty saucy collection of stuff from Baudelaire, and indeed from myself. So I translated them and wrote responses to them. Do you want the French as well, or just will I read a bit of my response?
Whatever you feel. And just so for people who are listening only, what's the name of the book?
The name is The Sweetness of Demons.
Yeah.
And you can see a picture of Charles Baudelaire on the front of that. À une Malabarese. Tes pieds sont aussi fins que tes mains, et ta hanche est large à faire envie à la plus belle blanche. À l'artiste pensif, ton corps est doux et cher. Tes grands yeux de velours sont plus noirs que ta chair. Au pays chaud et bleu où ton Dieu t'a fait naître, ta tâche est d'allumer la pipe de ton maître. I'll move to the English now and read the whole thing. And I've called it Lady of the Coconut Trees. Woman from Malabar, let me build a hammock across the expanse of your hips, and I will idle there. Lay down and feathers on your generous belly, and I will slumber deeply there. Let me take each of your feet to nurture and hold, fledglings preparing to fly. For safekeeping, consign each of your treasure-filled hands, and I will teach them a new craft of love play. Between the buttresses of your glorious thighs, I will scent the sweetness of pineapples and the spice oils of your race. Loosen your scarf one more time, and tamarind I will infuse my breathy kisses. And no, I will not take you to stern France, where concrete and grey will fade and reduce you. Pavements and parks contain and drain you. But rather, my dark Malabarese, stay soft on your mat. In loose robes of muslin, gather bounty, bejeweled by tropical sunshine and rainfall, the offerings of coconut trees and solid men of the sea.
That's lovely. And it makes me think, how do you approach translation such as that different? How is it different to writing your own poetry?
It was a very technical exercise. I did it during lockdown, the translation, and it was a very good discipline. It was a very good distraction, actually, because it didn't involve emotion. The writing of poetry, I think, is an emotional thing. But translation, nonetheless, is a creative act, yes, because you stand between the original and what you're going to produce. You stand between that, the native language. The act of translation too is about, I think, getting right inside the language. So, for instance, I would take one of his poems, read it and read it and read it and let it sit with me and go over it and over it till it was almost internal. So I could find the actual core of the meanings and then express that in the best match possible in English. That's the process, I think, for me, of translation. I have to say to you, though, that my own book, my first book, Language of My Choosing, was translated into Italian. And it was such a bad translation that my publisher contacted me about a month before it was due to go to the printer and said, we have to do this again. Will you do it? So I was booked for a holiday in Spain and I threw this translation together. And that was a horrible experience. First of all, it was horrible ruining my holiday. But secondly, and having to find an internet cafe every night to send the latest drafts. But the worst of it was when it was like going back to a deserted house with the ghosts, going back to this book of mine that was, 2 years old. I didn't want to inhabit again and having to relive it all. So it wasn't a very pleasant experience. I dare say the translation's not that hot either, but it might be a bit better than the original. That's it.
But that's really interesting because Language of My Choosing is a memoir. So you probably think, well, I've written this memoir, I'm done with that almost. And I'm presuming that was a very emotional experience to write such a thing, to look back on your life and write it, and then to have to go back to it once again must have been almost traumatic.
And there were bits in the memoir where things came out that I wasn't expecting, like my mother's relationship with a man half her age, and I remember writing it in a library in Belfast. And what I came to the realization when I was writing it, that I actually had feelings for him, but I could never let that out when I was, at home with my mother. And it only came just a few years ago. And I got up from the table. I couldn't stand. I was so emotional, actually, because this had just poured out suddenly, unexpectedly, So it was a very emotional thing. I think the other thing to say, though, is that I started that book with, I suppose, feelings of not quite getting my full due as a child of my mother's, that she hadn't parented me well. But I ended up, Alistair, thinking, actually, it was a process of reconciliation, really. I ended up thinking she did her best in the time that she had. So I felt, in a sense, much more at peace with my mother after writing that. So those were two emotional points in the book, I would say.
So why did you think, going on to the memoir, why did you believe that was something that you wanted to do, that it was important to do?
It started with a challenge from a friend who'd read poetry of mine and said, I challenge you to write a book. And I'll say, I'll never, ever write a book. I don't have the commitment. I don't want to get involved, spend years on it, not getting it published, not doing it. And then started fiddling about with the history of my grandparents in Viticuso, where they came from, and came over to Scotland in 1913. Started fiddling around with that, got caught up with a lot of the wartime stuff and the suffering that people had back there then. And then things just grew. And I suppose as I began to write that, I thought, this is a good story for my daughters.
Right.
So if nothing else happens, it's there for them. And then it just, got more and more intense, the experience and the desire to write it and to move to other aspects of my life.
And was it always going to be published, or was it originally going to be a private thing?
It was a private thing, and I kept kind of looking at my finances and saying, well, I'll just self-publish if nobody wants it, And then what happened was I was working with an animateur, if you like, an Italian who was here to gather stories from Scots Italians, and who said, well, how are you getting on with the memoir and all of that? And then when I'd done it, I finished it in Holy Isle. I used to go to Holy Isle before the pandemic to as a volunteer to cook, and finished it there, and then came back and contacted Carlo, and he said, send me a synopsis and I'll send it out. So he sent it to 2 publishers that day, and within a couple of hours, Lewis Press came back and said, send me the whole book. So I sent it by 5 o'clock. I was having people in for dinner. I was running about, very panicked and very excited. And then he wrote back that night and said, come and see me next Wednesday, if you can. And that's how it happened. So it's very exciting.
And you say that it was quite cathartic in that you were able to perhaps view your relationship with your mother in a different way. But what did it teach you about yourself? Did you then look upon your life in a different way through writing the memoir?
I did. I saw that, I suppose I saw that the mistakes I'd made went that far in some ways from my mother. The things I, condemn my mother for in many ways. I learned that motherhood probably was the most important thing in my life, and I hadn't really. I mean, you know it kind of in the doing of it, but I hadn't actually sat back and thought what my children had given me. What they'd given me was an experience of youth and fun, which I hadn't had growing up in a very kind of difficult home, mayhem in my house, with scenes and shouting and all the rest of it. So I got joy and fun from them. They taught me that. And they taught me how to mother. So I learned that. I really learned that I'd learned something, if you like, from them. And I suppose the other thing was I was writing about some of the key women in my life, in my family. And I saw them all as very strong women. Suddenly I saw that it was they who'd taken the family forward. Each of the women, my aunt, the girl who came, Ernestina, who came to our house to work for my mother, and and my grandmother, my own mother in a way too. So I saw women as very strong, and I began to have a real sense of the mamissima, the strong woman, the entrepreneur woman. And then that took me to thinking about women after the Second World War who had lost their men through the Arundel Star, and they came into rubble because there were riots and shops were destroyed, and they just picked up the pieces, literally picked up the pieces, and took the business forward with skills that they'd never had before or thought they'd have to use. And I've thought since that the Scottish Italian community is actually, it owes what it has, it's being stable and established now, to those women. It's the women who've taken it forward because the men weren't there, you know. So I believe, and I believe that that's under-celebrated actually by the community itself. We have very kind of loud men and big men and men who talk a lot about their business, but actually it was the women determinedly, hardworkingly just got on with it and pushed forward, and brought the children with them and learned the language and re-established us actually in the community, because people talked about dirty eye ties and not having any devil's blood ice cream and all that stuff, I was going to use a bad word there. So they did that. They brought us back, and through their networking skills, their ability to be liked, their ability to emote, to connect with people, because Italians have those skills. Those women did that.
It's interesting you say that, because at the beginning we made a list of all the things that you have done, and that idea of the entrepreneurial woman, or the person that has many strings to the bow, that is a line that you can see in yourself, I'm sure.
Yeah, maybe it's something to do with the immigrant, I don't know. It's also something to do with, I suppose, I had a conversation a while ago about, PhDs and all of that, and my one was on identity and constructed identity, so that you're not the same every day or in every situation, or you change according to your social structure, the surrounding, or the person you're speaking to, and you can be very, very different. And in a sense, what your life is about really is about self-making. That's what you do. You take opportunities and you become somebody else. And so all the things you describe are me being something else.
Yeah.
Me with my fiddle, I don't play well. Me talking in French in Aix-en-Provence to the woman that owns a cafe. Me in a cooking, or making stock in the Holy L kitchen, or in a shrine room because I'm a Buddhist, meditating. These are all different aspects. These are all different me's, and we, in a sense, and I think part of the energy in life is to constantly make yourself. That's what takes you forward. And it was particularly true, I felt, during the pandemic, where there was an awful lot of, I was really very, very frightened and wanted to hide under the bed, but eventually you find joy and ways of moving yourself forward, even within those restrictions and that awful time that we had.
And it does seem to me that all your work is concerned not just with identity, which it is, but also with examining the constrictions that you're talking about. On the back of Language of My Choosing, if I can quote, it says, "I wanted to leave all behind: the system, the family, the values, the insidious control of spirit and aspiration, the robbing of us, the new generation, of what it was to be young and hopeful, to be happy." Which that says to me that there were these constrictions in all sorts of kind of systems that you were having to almost escape to become who you wanted to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was the male thing, the male oracle, of course, and the domestic violence as well, as all of that. And people, the system, the Scottish Italian system, either seeing women as having to be married and be good wives, or even if getting degrees and then coming back, but going into the family network again. I felt very constrained by all, and for me the out was education, which is probably what inspired me to become an educationist myself. It was transformative, and I just latched on to and drank in all that I got from my wee convent school, in terms of the Schubert Trout Symphony or whatever it was, Wordsworth and the Ancient Manner. Drank it all in, loved it, and moved myself forward. And the best experience, my best school experience actually, was when my grandmother died and I was put to boarding school at 14. I started to board in that wee school, which was only 10 minutes from my house actually. But I loved the boarding experience because I was free. It was my life to make. I was free of all the shackles. Just move forward.
And I think the different way people often think about the boarding experience, without wanting to simplify it too much, is for some people it's an escape and a new beginning, and for other people it's a dread because they almost don't want that freedom or the potential that brings. And it made me think about, I was watching an interview you've got on YouTube, and you talk about being raised Catholic and how you had to escape that and those kind of institutions to become yourself. But it struck me that for some people, that's where they find belonging, and that alternatively, that's where they find comfort.
That's true. And I've been, I was actually thinking in January, because I haven't been able to get to Holy L, and I was just thinking I need something spiritual in my life, and this is awful. And I can't get to any live meetings. So I began to sidle up to a couple of churches, Christian churches. And I thought, well, at least, the discipline, I might just fit in and find something. And I've decided I don't fit anything. I mean, it just, nothing fits. Spiritual, but no religion, I think might be the thing for me, just I don't fit anything. Even Buddhist, I mean, I find Buddhism difficult too. There's a patriarchy, there's a hierarchy, all of that. But to me, it makes the most sense, actually. And if you were to ask me, one of my favorite writers, I would say Thich Nhat Hanh is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful poet. I recommend him very highly. Super.
So in a way, were the arts where you found your home, if you like? You've talked about music being there already, but then you've got, I mean, having spoken to you, I know how much you love live events and reading your poetry and being involved in the poetry scene and in other scenes. That was a home perhaps for you.
Yeah, the arts very much. And it was a lone journey. I mean, I used to, you know, buy 4 or 5 tickets for events on one day during the Edinburgh Festival. I just had a ball, you know, during the Edinburgh Festival, and did that for years until I, got more responsibilities, I suppose. And part of it was a learning process. You know, I used to go to the Usher Hall every Friday night and just sit and listen to the SNO, it was then, and learn the repertoire, and that's been a very good basis, of course, on which for me to move on, and do all the other things. I was also, I did a grade 8 piano, so I was a pianist and really loved doing that. Played with other people too. That's in a sense something I've lost and I regret now, but it's taken me to other things. Just after I retired, I decided I want to. I picked up a mandolin just randomly, and then decided to find someone to help me play it. So I've done that. And I thought then, I'll never be perfect again, or whatever. I'll never be at that level. Put it that way, never be at that level. But if I could just play to enjoy the instrument and play with people accepted, that might not be quite so good, that'd be great. And so the mandolin's been fab. And then during lockdown, I taught myself the fiddle. And again, it's a bit swooping and scratchy, but I do play with people and we have fun. And that's the main thing, actually.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And you mentioned it sounds like you've done quite a lot of things during lockdown, but was it a difficult period? I mean, it was a difficult period for everyone, but I'm guessing it probably was for yourself.
It was because my daughters, one's in Bristol and 2 are in London. So obviously I couldn't get there except when they lifted restrictions. And I remember actually, I didn't see them at Christmas 2020. That was awful. I'm not that gregarious, but I was standing at the window on my own, waiting for my husband to arrive, my ex-husband, because he was coming, because he was a bubble. And I was standing at the window just waving at passers-by, saying, Happy Christmas, like some kind of demented lunatic. And then I wrote to Nicola in January and said, please give me my children back. This is awful. And actually, one of the things I discovered through lockdown was how Italian I actually am. I've gone through periods where I'm not Italian and I'm not Scottish and I'm maybe French and I'm all these things. But I realized that in my gut, I'm so Italian, and it's to do with my reactions and my passions, like writing to Nicholas, giving my children back. It's so dramatic, I can't imagine many Scots people doing that, really. They might do it another way, or crying when I'm, on the phone to them, or crying at seeing somebody kiss somebody else, So that it defined my Italianism, and that maybe isn't a bad thing, and that's led to my new book, of course.
Yeah, which we will talk about, absolutely.
Yeah,
that again, it kind of strengthens that idea of how fluid and changeable identity is. I love the idea that you go to France and when you're there, you're French. And even the fact that you say you're writing for people who are between 20s and 40s, that's going to reflect upon the youth that you feel in yourself and say, these are the people I identify with. And I think that's very true. I think that is something that some people maybe do not accept, but there is this constant change about who we are and how we view ourselves and how others view us as well.
That's true. The trouble, of course, is that people, I might feel in my 20s or 40s, but people don't see you that way, of course. I get quite insulted when cars stop to let me cross the road, things like that, But yes, I try to. That's my market. Yeah, definitely. And as you say, we are who we feel, actually, and we are who we want to be. And I think that in lockdown, for instance, there were gaps and there were ways of overcoming barriers. I think that was the message in Keeping Away the Spiders, that second book that I wrote. It's about saying to people, no matter what, almost no matter what, obviously I'm thinking of Ukraine at the moment, but almost no matter what, we can overcome the barriers, we can move forward in some way or other. Because I've had barriers, everyone has barriers, Some have more barriers than others, accept that. And one of the greatest barriers to happiness, I suppose, but ultimately did lead to happiness, I'm sure, was having a disabled daughter, giving birth to a disabled daughter, my first daughter, and how we found joy and bonding, very close bonding throughout that whole period. And she's a very successful professional woman now, just come through that. She lives with it, I live with it, we live with it as a family, but we have found happiness as well. And we've reached some kind of barrier and gone to a different place with it, I think, you know.
Well, that's very interesting in the way that approaching these barriers is almost all how you decide that, you know, how these things are going to be tackled in that way. And you mentioned the importance of your Italian Scots background, which leads us on to your new book in work, which I'm very excited about. So what can you tell us about the book that you're working on at the moment?
I'm very excited too, Alistair. It partly to cheer me up as well. I've started it. I'm a great lover of food. I like cooking it. I like offering it. I like eating it. I like trying it and experimenting with it. I like every kind of cuisine, I think, just about. You know, traveled and been all over. Love Asian food and all the rest of it. So anyway, this book is to highlight the food of Southern Italy. My thesis is there's no such thing as Italian food.
Right.
There are, you know, there's Tuscan food, there's Venetian food, all the rest of it. So this is about the food of Southern Italy, but it not only highlights the food of Southern Italy, it tells anecdotes, it highlights the language of Southern Italy, the lovely, lovely dialect, that rich gravy-like dialect which comes from there, the music of Southern Italy as well. So it's a book about Southern Italy and the culture. There are recipes, obviously, in it, and that, you know, that is a focus, but there's stories around that, and wee snippets of, you know, history of, you know, the mozzarella, where mozzarella comes from, the history of crostini, how they developed. You know, they were food of the poor people, the scraps of bread. They had to soften it by putting wine or olive oil on it or water. And then they put scraps of whatever was left over on the crostini. And that developed into the beautifully elegant crostini that we would get in Cantina Frescobaldi, for instance, in a dark panelled room, you know, sipping a beautiful wine from the Franciacorta or something like that. So there's that. There's also a soundtrack with the book. As I go along, I'm picking out singers who from that part of Italy, from Naples and Rome, and picking out beautiful dialect songs, nice lively ones or whatever as well. So that's what the book's about, having fun with it.
Yeah, and because you've promised wine selections as well, I think there's going to be
yes, that's right.
Really because some people most people probably won't know that I was a chef for many years in restaurants, and actually worked in a Mediterranean restaurant in Australia for a while. And so this just sounds like the perfect book for me. It's got the history, it's got the culture, it's got the music, but it's got the recipes too. So why did you want to do this? What was the inspiration for this book?
I suppose food, for many of us actually, food became very important during lockdown. Wasn't much else really. So it was important. There was a kind of event that my partner and I in the evening would, you know, dress nicely, you know, not dressed up, but clean up, you know, and have a nice meal together. And, you know, she enjoys my food, her family enjoys my food, my own family enjoy my food. And the kind of, I'd gathered lots of recipes during that time. I had the recipes from my grandmother. I grew up with my grandmother making frittatas, soft polenta, not the kind of rubbery polenta that we see, you know, in restaurants, fried or grilled, but the soft porridge with a beautiful, lovely sugo on top, and maybe some mushrooms on the side, sauteed, cipollati and so on. Grew up with that. I grew up with her making Easter puff pastry things called crucial, she called them. Pizza, fabulous pizza. Never overloaded. One or two ingredients in squares. She would just put the dough in with a bit of sugo on top, some tomatoes, a bit of garlic, and it was delicious. So all of those things are, making pastina in brodo, for when you went well, and all it was just a vegetable broth or a chicken broth with some little pasta, meat pastina in them, and maybe an egg beaten in, and that. So all of these things are there in the book, actually. And then some things I've done myself as well. I learned to make bread, for instance, focaccia during lockdown. So these things are there. And I've also referenced really good food people like Rachel Roddy, who I think writes beautifully about food. Makes you want to eat it, obviously. Yep. Anna Del Conte, Marcella Hazan, who's my guru and really taught me a lot about French, Italian cooking as well. I think she's out of print now, actually. So these would be my 3 people, I think, that I would go back to again and again for ideas.
But classically and probably understandably from you, you aren't going to go, I'm just going to write a cookbook. You've got all these other aspects to it. So how does this book kind of fit in with your other publications? Because again, it's got identity at its core.
It has, that's right. It's an expression of Italianismo, of Southern Italianismo. And it's about highlighting what I think people maybe don't know about or want to push aside, which is the dialect and the language, all of that. How it fits in, I suppose, is the Sweetness of Demons, actually, is an expression of my desire or Frenchism. I mean, because I want to be, part of me wants to be French, so that's the expression of it. And I love getting the language around my tongue in the way that I love getting Italian around my tongue and the dialect around my tongue. So it fits with that. Keeping Away the Spiders, where I talked about this book here, where I talk about different aspects of identity. This, I suppose, is a fuller account of one identity, this new book, that one identity that I feel I want to put on the table, I want to share for lots and lots of reasons, tradition and all the fine women and etc., all of that. And maybe hand something on as well, actually, to my girls. It was that thing. And it does follow on from Language of My Choosing, which dealt a lot with the roots and the upbringing and all of that. Just a good follow on from that. I keep having to stop myself going back into some of those old stories. Actually, this is about food, Anne. Keep to the subject, So I think it fits in pretty well. It's also a lighter take. This is a serious book, actually, about sexuality and difficult things. And this is again a serious book, I think. But this is just a light-hearted, but thoughtful book, I think, on food. And I'm not sure whether to put in, but still in the making, I'm not sure whether to put in my experiments with Lebanese cooking, Middle Eastern, which I love as well, and Asian cooking. I might put a wee sneaky chapter, but my daughter said she got annoyed at me and said it was cultural appropriation and I wasn't to do that. So we'll leave that one just now.
But it does sound from how you described it to me that this almost was the book that you've been working towards. It encapsulates all your passions and your interests and your themes and ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and I mean, I have a difficult relationship with Italy. It's not been an easy one. I mean, they drive me mad. I get really angry in Italy. Which is probably why I haven't visited as much as I might have done. I mean, I was there for 5 months as a student and I've been back forward. But sometimes I just can't take the stress of it. I get really angry with them. I find it's still quite a sexist society. I find that really difficult. I feel quite repressed by it. But I love the joyfulness, the gleefulness of Italians. I love the noisiness of the Southern Italians. I love the love, the sheer love of life. I think the vivacity of them, and in a sense, it's maybe it is in contrast to having had 2 years of restrictions. Actually, that I want to visit all that. I want to hear a noise. I want people to be lively and move about. I want to see throngs of people. So all of that, I'm imagining bits like that in my book. I've got a wee passage about that, how people just come together all'ora dell'aperitivo, you know, and the way that they just gather together and eat wonderful cicchetti and assaggini and all of that with their Campari soda. So yeah, it's a celebration, I think, of it.
And do you know when it might be published, or is that still to be decided?
Spoke to Louis Press, so I mean, he's not said yes yet. We're hoping he'll say yes. He's got outlines and so on. We think that he'll have a draft, we hope, by September. So I'm working towards that, and I'm halfway to that, I think. I'm about 20,000 words in, so I'm about halfway in, if you think of a book about 50,000 words. Yeah. And there'll be hopefully a playlist at the end of the book. Fantastic. There was a playlist in, or something similar, in Keeping Away the Spiders. I called it Lockdown Music, and I listed the things that kept me going, like Duncan Chisholm with COVID Cayley every morning, The Gentle Light That Wakes Me, and the wonderful things he played in the morning. So there is a playlist, and I also, during lockdown, I tried to explore female contemporary composers. So I came across Sally Beamish and other people. So yeah, so that's the plan, and I think I'll get that done. I usually go camping in the summer. I usually take myself off of a tent, so I think I'll get quite a lot of writing done then. Excellent.
And you mentioned at the beginning that you've got a love and a background in Scottish traditional music and a kind of folk music as well. So is that of your Italian Scots background, was that always there in the Scots background?
Was it Scots music always in my background?
Yeah.
No, I mean, my background is Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, all the great tenor saxophonists, you know, Louis Armstrong, all that stuff. Grew up with that. My father was a jazz musician. They separated, they divorced, and there was a lot of domestic violence. So I didn't really know my father really. I thought last summer when I was 6 years old. So, but I still remember seeing his saxophone around the house and things like that. But I grew up with that. My mother used to went to mass with my mother. She used to embarrass me because, you know, you'd sing the credo and she would sing it with a jazz kind of, she'd sing it a la Billie Holiday. It was really embarrassing. I had to shut up. I still remember her doing that. So I got with that. So Scottish music, no, I came to Scottish music seriously just when I retired. I found a wonderful guru of Scottish traditional music, Nigel Gatherer, and I've been going to some of his gatherings, classes with mandolin, etc. So I've come to that, and you know, I now crave live perform. You know, I went up to Ullapool actually just about a few months ago and joined some musicians there. Just take my fiddle and have some fun with it. Actually,
yeah,
great.
It's great to be out and be able to do that again. Definitely,
absolutely, yeah.
Well, Anne, it's been such a pleasure to catch up with you. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed chatting to you, and I'm just wondering, maybe I could send you some recipes and you could trial them for me, give me some feedback.
Absolutely, yeah. Give you proper feedback. Take pictures on Instagram as people do these days and get them out there.
So you've caused a wee spark for me. You've lit a wee spark there, Alistair.
Excellent.
I might do that.
I look forward to that.
Thank you very much.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.